All right, I'm wearing Montreal again. This is 22 Stanley Cups for those of you counting at home. But there's a lot of things that go on this season, so we'll get into it. Montreal leads the way in the Norris Division, 52, 17, and 11, followed by Pittsburgh at 36, 31, and 13. LA 34, 34, and 12. The Capitals don't finish last. They're 24, 41, and 15, but they still don't make the playoffs. Detroit 23, 41, and 16. Nobody wants to go to Detroit at this point in time. Adams Division is led by Boston at 43, 23, and 14. Followed by Buffalo 36, 28, and 16. Toronto 34, 33, and 13. And the Minnesota North Barons are 28, 40, and 12. The Minnesota North Stars, the Cleveland Barons, have merged into a super team that wins 28 games. And that's sort of what happens. And we'll see the Minnesota North Stars start getting better, and eventually they get broken up again, and half the team gets sent to San Jose. Or the idea would be that Cleveland merges with the Minnesota North Stars. And of course, Cleveland was the California Seals. So when the San Jose Sharks come back in, the reason I'm saying come back is because they were the California Seals. So, yeah, and it's same owners and all that wonderful stuff. But we'll get into that when we get to the 1991 portion of things. I just want to point out this was a merger, which means it's contraction. Technically, it's contraction because you have 17 teams now instead of 18. And I'm sure there were fans saying, about time, talent's too diluted in this league. It's a good thing we're down to 17 teams. And the WHA is dropping teams too. So jobs are getting harder to come by if you're a pro hockey player at this point. In the Patrick Division, the Islanders lead the way at 51, 15, and 14. Followed by Philly at 40, 25, and 15. The Rangers at 40, 29, and 11. And there's the Atlanta Flames at 41, 31, and 8. Smythe Division is led by a losing team. It's garbage. It's the worst division that I've seen on the board. And it might end up being the worst division we see on the board. It's won by Chicago, 29, 36, and 15. It just reminds me of Homer going to space and saying that it's the two greatest words in the English language, default. I think that's what Chicago must have been thinking, because Vancouver doesn't put up much of a fight at 25, 42, and 13, followed by St. Louis at 18, 50, and 12. And then there's the Colorado Rockies at 15, 53, and 12. Oh boy. And it's a mess that's not going to get better for Colorado because notice it's a New Jersey Devils magnet that's there. There's a reason for that. March 29th of 1979, the WHA merger is announced. And there wasn't a whole lot of time, you'll notice, before the 79-80 season when we found out, hey, there's more teams coming in. But before this season, the WHA tried to get a merger going, and the NHL went, we'll wait till you're hurting even more than you already are. And things started falling apart because of financial reasons. Winnipeg loses Ulf Nilsson and Anders Hedberg to the New York Rangers. And you'll notice that 78-79 with Nilsson and Hedberg, the Rangers suddenly are a better team. July 26, 1978, the New York Islanders signed John Tonelli. So all of the pieces are now on the board for the New York Islanders to become a dominant team, but it's 1979, so it's not their turn yet. October 18th, 1978, Dennis Maruk is traded to the Washington Capitals by the Minnesota North Stars. Maruk played for Cleveland. Part of the merger, going to Minnesota. He's the biggest star for Cleveland, so what does Minnesota do? We'll just trade him. He plays 2 games in Minnesota, 0 points. So he was on pace for 0 points over an 80-game schedule, so I get it. But he goes to Washington, and he plays a role in Washington becoming at least respectable. March 11th of 1979, Randy Holt of the Kings gets 67 penalty minutes in a game against Philly, and he only plays in the first period before all those penalty minutes, all those game misconducts, everything that happened to him in that game happens in one period. So with Randy Holt setting a record that's impressive considering games don't go to overtime, so you got 67 minutes of penalties in a 60-minute game, April 8th of 1979, Denny Potvin is the second defenseman following Bobby Orr to get to 100 points. This is also the season that features Bobby Orr's last games in the NHL. And he plays them for that sad Chicago team. Looking at Chicago and where they were and where they are now, it's like, it just feels like all the Bobby Orr years kind of get wasted. They get one Stanley Cup and then that's it. The Hart Trophy goes to Brian Trottier. The Art Ross Trophy goes to Brian Trottier. That's why I did the video about him this morning. I did the research on this last night, and I thought, you know what? I need to do a Trottier video. The Norris Trophy goes to Denny Potvin. The Calder goes to Bobby Smith of the Minnesota North Stars. So it's kind of doom and gloom for Minnesota, but you can kind of understand Maruk getting traded out when they've got this dynamic young Bobby Smith coming in, and maybe they just felt they didn't have room for Dennis Baruch on the team. Vezina goes to Ken Dryden and Michel Larocque, Bunny Larocque of the Montreal Canadiens. Bob McMillan of the Atlanta Flames wins the Lady Byng. The Masterton goes to Serge Savard of the Montreal Canadiens. The Pearson Award goes to Marcel Dion of the LA Kings. So the Hart voted on as MVP is Trottier. The best player voted on as Marcel Dion of the 500 LA Kings. The Conn Smythe Trophy goes to Bob Gainey of the Montreal Canadiens, which is kind of awesome. The Gainey wins 2 awards that year, and he's a very defensively minded forward. He could hurt you offensively too, though. The Patrick Award for growing the game in the States is not shared between people this year. It only goes to Bobby Orr. So as sort of a send-off and a thank you, he gets the Patrick Award for helping to grow the game in the States. And absolutely, he's an icon in Boston then. He's an icon in Boston now. Makes total sense. The number 1 draft pick that year is Rob Ramage. Rob Ramage would play 1,044 games. He'd end up with 139 goals, 425 assists, 564 points. Played for the Colorado Rockies, who drafted him. They went to St. Louis, Calgary, Toronto, Minnesota, Tampa, Montreal, and Philly. And the Montreal and Philly runs were very, very short. So he ends up basically playing for 6 teams, and then the other 2 was like a handful of games. So there's your award winners. There's your pick. And Rob Ramage is a guy who may end up needing his own video at some point. Because he was the team captain for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I have a Maple Leafs jersey with Ramage on the back. So, I may kind of need it. I may need to do that video. First and second team All-Stars. First team, there's Brian Trottier at center. Guy Lafleur on right wing. Clark Gillies of the Islanders on left wing. Potvin and Robinson on the blue line. And Dryden in goal. So all of your first team All-Stars are made up of Islanders and Canadians. Second team, Marcel Dion is your center. Mike Bossy on right wing. Bill Barber on left wing. Borje Salming and Serge Savard on defense. And Chico Resch in net. So Billy Smith hasn't reached that point yet, but he's getting there. And he's going to get there next season. The preliminary round. So this is still best 2 out of 3. Philadelphia knocks out Vancouver in 3. The Rangers sweep LA. Toronto sweeps Atlanta. And the Pittsburgh Penguins beat Buffalo in 3. So the Buffalo Sabres going through a bit of a dry patch after that Stanley Cup final appearance. We'll see them get back to being pretty darn good, but we'll also see some rough spots along the way for a team that is still searching for its first Stanley Cup victory. The quarterfinals. The New York Islanders sweep Chicago. So Chicago, we won the division. Doesn't matter. The Islanders knock them out. Montreal sweeps Toronto. Again. Is this the last time that Montreal and Toronto have played in the playoffs? Could be. Boston sweeps Pittsburgh. So everybody's in a hurry. At this point, everybody's in a hurry. Let's get these playoffs over with. I got to get home. The Rangers didn't get the memo. They won their series in 5 against Philly. So Philly as well. Coming off of the 2 Stanley Cups, 74 and 75, and it's been frustration for the last 4 seasons for them. So they escaped the preliminary round with a 3-game series win over Vancouver, and then in the quarterfinals they get shut down by the Rangers in 5. In the semifinals, the New York Rangers, New York Islanders, the Rangers win that series in 6. I believe that is when the 1940 chant is born. Islander fans using it to taunt the Rangers about the fact that they haven't won a Stanley Cup at this point in 39 years. The Montreal Canadiens beat Boston in 7. And as I said yesterday, we'll discuss this briefly. It's Game 7. Boston's up with about 6 minutes left in the game. They're up 4-3 on the Montreal Canadiens. It looks like they're going to take Montreal out. And then there's too many men on the ice. and this is Don Cherry's Waterloo. It's not a controversial call in that it's the right call to make. It's controversial because how does that happen in Game 7 of a semifinal game between two bitter rivals like Montreal and Boston? Well, whatever reason there is for why there were so many people on the ice, Boston takes the penalty and Montreal scores on the power play. Now, I've always said this too. Whether you agree with the call or you disagree with the call or whether it's a good or bad call, kill the penalty. Kill the penalty. We have nothing to talk about the day after. Boston didn't. They go to overtime. Again, Boston wants this not to be a part of the narrative for the next 35, 40 years. Kill that penalty. Or if it's going into overtime, win in overtime. They didn't. They let a dynasty off the hook. And they paid for it. The Habs won it in overtime. And it added to Guy Lafleur's standing as one of the greatest of all time. And it added to the mystique of the Montreal Canadiens. And as I always say, it's a bad matchup for Boston. It just is. It's a ridiculously bad matchup for Boston. And it's not going to be until this dynasty is gone that Boston finally somewhat evens things up. But even recently, it still doesn't feel like things are completely evened up. In the finals, so you've got Montreal and the Rangers in the final. The Rangers win 4-1 in Montreal. They had to feel pretty good about that. They won a game in Montreal. They get first game. That means they've stolen home ice. Montreal wins game 2 6-2. It's fine. They got home ice until Montreal arrives in New York. They win 4-1, and then they win 4-3 in overtime. So the New York Rangers lose both at home. They're going to Montreal. They lose game 5 in Montreal 4-1. Montreal again, world champions. And they only wore a jersey with this on the front after one of their Stanley Cup wins. At this point, they might as well have just worn it for the 78-79 season because it just feels like nobody else was going to challenge them anyways. And notice, the Islanders fail in the semifinals, and there's magazines I have from that period that talk about how the Islanders are struggling to get over that hump. Well, that last piece they need will arrive in 1980. Playoff goal leader is Jacques Lemaire with 11. Assist leaders, Guy Lafleur with 13 and Don Maloney with 13. So there's the trivia answer. Who co-led the league in assists in the 1979 playoffs? Don Maloney of the Rangers. You're going to get people with that one. Points leaders are Lemaire and Lafleur. So Le means you're winning. 23 points for both of them. And it is another impressive run for Ken Dryden and the boys. And we'll see what happens to them in 1980. Because Ken Dryden decided to get his law degree and get into politics after this. And he was gone. So Dryden, in his prime, decides, well, all right, I'm good. And he retired. And with him, so went the dynasty of the Montreal Canadiens. But there you go. They are the champion for today. They're the champion of this season. That is their 22nd, as I said, out of 24. And it is a big year for the New York Islanders. And next year, and in tomorrow's video, we will see the Islanders finally reach the top and how they got there. But for today, we're done. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. Just happened upon this video. And I'll talk to you again soon.